Welcome to the Real Life Buyer podcast. In this podcast, you will hear interviews with business owners, entrepreneurs, thought leaders, authors, and technical specialists in their field. These professionals will hasten your development, accelerate your career, and broaden your business know-how. Now, introducing your host, Dave Barr, interviewing with a purchasing twist.
Hello, and welcome to the Real Life Buyer. The subject of today's podcast is often dear to the hearts of entrepreneur business owners. Today, I'm exploring the opportunities to minimize one's business tax burden. My guest today is John Briggs, CEO and founder of Incite Tax, based in Utah, and the author of Profit First for Microgyms. Incite Tax and Accounting provides a premier proactive tax and accounting service to small business owners and individuals. They help their clients grow their wealth whilst lowering their tax bills, so they can help more of the money stay with yourself and you become more financially flexible in your life. So without further ado, I welcome John onto the podcast. Hi, John.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. I'm glad to have you on board. Tax is quite a difficult subject for many, both from a technical perspective and perhaps an emotional perspective as well. But let's dive in and understand where you have come from in this. Did you grow up as a boy dreaming of becoming a tax accountant? And if not, what was it about this subject that drew you in?
Yeah, I can tell you, no, the thought of being a tax accountant didn't cross my little mind as I was, playing with G.I. Joes and Hot Wheels. So I had a mentor in my life. I did a service mission for my church, and this mentor, I asked him, I go, hey, you've known me for a little bit. What do you think I should do? And he said, well, based on your personality and what I know about you, maybe something with business or law. And so it just so happens both of those paths at school took me through an accounting class. And it was the first time in my life a subject really clicked. I always got good grades, but I had to work at it. And in this case, I don't know why my weird mind understands debits and credits and all this stuff. So there was that moment. And then there is this element. As a child, I was actually bullied by neighborhood kids. They thought I was just really fun to pick on. And so I have a bit of a radar when I feel like someone's being bullied. It just so happens the world's largest bully is the IRS. And I have this internal desire to protect people from bullying situations. And so that combination kind of led me down the road of taxes. And I discovered it's a bit of a game. I mean, with 77,000 pages, there's a lot of opportunity there for people to lower their taxes and just get a lot of pleasure out of it.
That's great. Certainly the tax authorities in the UK, HMRC, are, as you say, quite onerous. The last thing you want to receive, obviously, is an envelope coming through your door from one of those organisations. I certainly know when I see it, I think, oh, goodness, what's happened now? What are they after? So, I can appreciate the stress that can come with these kind of things. So you've worked with businesses for quite some time now, and I'm really keen to understand some of the excellent things you've done for these companies. So can you share some examples of perhaps the most successful tax minimization strategies that you've implemented for some of your clients, and how those strategies have been adapted or perhaps adopted for businesses outside of the US as well, or how they can be?
Yeah. So from a principle standpoint, this applies to anyone in whatever country you pay taxes. The first thing is understanding the entity structure, because if you don't have the right entity structure in whatever country, you're overpaying in taxes. So like in the US, for example, if someone has what the IRS classifies as self-employment income, which is really just any income you make that's not on a W-2, I mean, that's the majority of it. They want you to pay this self-employment tax on top of your income tax. Well, if you have the right entity choice, you can minimize that. Also, having the right entity choice allows you to have a legal protection, which is really helpful. So there's some added benefit there. And it's the same deal, right? It doesn't matter whatever country, you need to understand the different tax rules as it applies to the different businesses and make sure that you chose the right structure. So like in the US, you have LLCs, S-corps, corporations, partnerships. You got to have the right one based on the way you're earning income. And I think that applies to everybody. But so much low-hanging fruit. Some people didn't even realize there was options other than being what we call a sole proprietor. Like, wait, I can actually set up some sort of formal thing, but I'm not an Apple, I'm not an Amazon, I'm not a giant company. It's like, yeah, but you still need this. So that's the first one. The second one is understanding deductions. So in the US, the tax code uses words that are super vague. They say in order for it to be a deduction, it has to be ordinary and necessary. And that was confusing. So they tried to add additional help, and they added two more words, helpful and appropriate. Like, well, I know, as you know, our idea of what's helpful and appropriate is not their idea.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm willing to bet UK or whatever other country has similar language, and like, this is a write-off. So what we tell clients, and as far as I know, this is across the board in any country we've come across, if you can connect the dollar you're spending to your business in any way, then it's a business expense. Now, depending on how you might have to account for it a little bit differently based on the country you're in. There might be some like VAT tax tied to it or something like that, a GST for Canada. But just understanding that I'm spending $1. Did I spend this because it's related to my business? Then I need to be writing that off and claiming it as a tax deduction.
There's a lot of things to think about there, particularly for somebody who is new in business, those people who are brave enough to become self-employed, obviously, one-man bands who are hopefully trying to make a crust. And for those who do set up, for us, limited companies, the requirements, the regulations, certainly in the UK, are far more onerous. And certainly with limited companies, one tends to think of, I need to have an accountant. Now, for those people who are new, who are perhaps even about to set up their own business venture, you should think about, I guess, some kind of tax planning. And people who've never done this before probably are quite confused about, well, what does tax planning mean? How do you go about this? Particularly if you're small, particularly if you haven't got the support of an accountant. Can you recommend perhaps some systems, some actions that you can take? Can you explain what's some good things to do to plan for tax, and what measures you can take to try and mitigate some tax for those newbies, shall we say?
So two things come to mind. First one is dealing with a professional familiar with your rules and regulations. Nowadays, with the way the internet is and social media, I guarantee there's already free information out there that's good free information that'll tell you, like, this is what you should do as a startup. Here are things you should consider based on these country laws. So having a professional is really important. Now, maybe you want to DIY the bookkeeping aspect. You can keep track of that. Cool, great. Bootstrap, that's fine. When it comes to tax filings, at least in the US, if you're a business owner, we definitely don't recommend DIYing your tax returns as a business owner. There are softwares out there. Does TurboTax have a UK product?
Not sure about TurboTax, but we might be talking about a similar thing. My son has set up his own business, and he uses an online app where he can record all the transactions, take photographs of invoices and that kind of stuff that get uploaded.
So there's like a QuickBooks or Xero for bookkeeping stuff.
Absolutely. That's right. Those are recognized. Yeah.
I imagine there's also a tax filing software that if you pay the $30 or whatever, it walks you through it. The issue with all those softwares, whether that's TurboTax or TaxSlayer, it's a big industry. They'll ask you, how much expense did you have in office supplies? They don't actually tell you what qualifies as office supplies, right? And that's across the board with whatever the expense category is. They ask you what your number is, but then as the person who doesn't really understand the tax code, most people are like, I don't know. Does this count? Is this part of this category? I don't know. So using a professional is definitely recommended on the business side. If you just have a personal return, you can probably get away with DIYing if you're looking at bootstrapping still. But that's the first thing I would do. Let's Google and find the startups. And I mean, nowadays with ChatGPT might get you a similar response more efficiently. But understanding that. So just in the US, if I'm just starting off, the first thing I'm going to check is my entity. Is it the right selection? The next thing I'm going to do is decide, how will I account for the expenses? Please do not wait to make that decision, right? Because a lot of times business owners, we can get distracted with making money, bringing in the revenue, and then we put off every month, I'll get to that. I'll eventually get to my accounting. I understand it's not sexy for most business owners. It's not what they went into business to do, but it's a necessary part of the business. And you can make it a valuable part of your business if you do it regularly and then look at the numbers. So that'd be the second thing I decide to do. Like, am I going to do it myself? If so, am I going to use Excel or a Google Doc or a piece of paper or a software like QuickBooks or Xero? And then if not, am I going to hire somebody? Like, do I have enough revenue coming in fast enough, or can I leverage my money to save myself time because maybe I don't think I'm going to do the bookkeeping right? That's also valid. Most business owners don't have any business doing their own books. So paying someone helps them minimize the mistakes that are going to be made, because mistakes made sometimes increase taxes because you accounted for it wrong. I literally had a client, he booked his payroll expense as a liability on his balance sheet. So it didn't actually show up as an expense. It was just sitting over here on this balance sheet, which doesn't reduce taxable income. And, luckily we found that, and it saved him 70 grand in taxes. He was going to overpay 70 grand just because he made a bookkeeping error. So sometimes it's worth the investment. So entity setup, how am I going to do my bookkeeping? And then for your specific country that you're in or state, are there any specific things that maybe I need to be aware of as a business owner? The second thing that comes to mind when it comes to tax planning is planning for the actual cash outflow of paying the tax. So we love following Profit First, which is a cash flow management system. And part of that system is I sit down twice a month or once a week, no more than once a week. And I'm going to take money, all the money that came in over the last week, and I'm going to put it into my different buckets. One of those buckets is for my tax burden. So feel free to look at the system, and we can go into more detail you want. I love the system, so I'm happy to talk about it. But if you do nothing else from a cash flow management standpoint of planning for taxes, have a separate account for the tax burden. And if you set aside money once a week or twice a month, you don't feel the pain, right? It's different to add a couple $100 here. My business isn't going to be affected by that. If I don't do that and come tax time, it's like you owe 10 grand. Where am I going to find the 10 grand instead of it just already being saved up? So those are the two things that come to mind when it comes to tax planning.
Yeah. As you say, it's the getting into the routine, the regularity, and having the kind of rigor and process in place to make sure that happens every single month. It's so easy. I know personally, it's so easy to skip a month, and then it's so more difficult to get your memory back and try and find out what happened over the last few months. And you tend to lose things. People lose paperwork, and before you know it, you're in a whole mess of problems, aren't you? So so have those routines in place. And as you say, if you've got a savings account, particularly for tax, for the tax man for the future, you cannot touch it. It's sacrosanct. It's locked down. Don't think you can just dip in there this week and put it back next week. Often it probably won't happen, I guess.
Right. No, it will not happen. We have clients who have tried that and they never get around to paying themselves back for that.
Yeah. Now, that's possibly classed as perhaps a tax pitfall if you're not having that rigor. But are there other sort of pitfalls, shall I say, that people often fail to avoid? Are there proactive things that people should do when trying to minimize their tax liability that they should also consider?
Yeah, I mean, this is again where dealing with a professional familiar with your country's tax laws comes into play. Look, the IRS code is 77,000 pages. I don't know how big the code is, but all these organizations, all these governments work the same way. They need to tax the people to provide the government services. And the government services they're providing are probably bloated, right? It's pretty universal across the countries. And so they're obviously incentivized to get as much money out of their citizens as possible. So dealing with a professional who's familiar with your rules so you can implement the strategies that apply is usually, and if not, then you don't do it, but you're going to save more in taxes than the fees you pay that professional. So one of the reasons why they're in business is because they become an investment. They should be an investment to their clients. I can't strongly recommend enough working with an actual professional over this. The nuances are too much, and you don't want that on your plate. You're better off focusing your time and energy on growing your business with the skill set that you have than messing with reading the tax code and what can I do? What can I do? Well, just sit down with a professional. Here's my situation. They'll say, here are the strategies you can implement, because all countries have strategies. So do that. Another pitfall that maybe doesn't necessarily tie into, planning for the future, but when you get a letter from your government, the taxing agency, don't assume it's correct. So many people just send a check off, not realizing that in our case, more than 80% of the letters we receive from clients, they're just not accurate. Like literally in my inbox right now, I have a client who said, I just got this letter from the IRS. They're penalizing me because I filed my tax return late. Classic move by the IRS. We'll just send this letter and hope people will pay it. Well, we just so happen to have proof that she filed an extension and that she filed on time. So it takes us 15 minutes to create the letter that she can send off. And like the penalty that they're trying to hit her with was, $3,000. Some taxpayers are getting that and they're just sending off the check, and they're probably mad at their accountant thinking their accountant screwed up, or maybe they're mad at themselves. Like, oh, maybe I screwed up. No, shocking. They don't process everything correctly. Right. And so we're luckily here to help them defend themselves and provide the proof needed to get them out of it. So don't believe the letters when you receive them. Have a professional look at it with you.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. As you say, you know how to deal with these situations. Perhaps people get scared. They're threatened. They feel that if they don't do something immediately, pay the money, then somebody in a uniform is going to come knocking on the door and take them down to the courthouse or wherever they're going to go. And that's quite intimidating, isn't it? Say, oh, crikey, just pay the money, get these people off our backs. Perhaps is a reaction that people have, because they do feel, threatened in some ways. They just don't want the trouble that can come there. And as you're kind of your own, their personal police force. You're helping them to protect them from things that are perhaps incorrect. Mistakes happen on all sides.
And you brought up a good point. There's sometimes, and the IRS plays a game. Look, I totally believe that they do this on purpose, where they send you the letter. Maybe they're saying you owe us $180, $200, something small, where it would actually cost you, if you're using a professional, they charge you for the time. That's why they're in business. They don't do free work. And maybe they're like, it's going to cost you $300 at a minimum to take care of something that is, the actual penalty is less. Yeah, sometimes it makes sense to just pay the small amount, get them off your back, because the cost to fight it is more expensive. I mean, that's in the US legal system. That's pretty much how the legal system works, is you get all these people and they just settle with each other. A lot of settlements happen because the downside of the risk is too much. They just pay it then.
Yep. Now, one of the things that comes up, certainly in the UK, we have tax minimisation, which is legitimate, but there's also tax avoidance. And one has got to be quite careful about what is seen to be avoiding paying your taxes. And that could fall into all sorts of legal ramifications. Can you help to explain to people the issues or the considerations with tax avoidance, what that means?
Yeah. So let me just use a different vernacular for me in the US, because there's tax avoidance and there's tax evasion.
Right.
So there was actually a judge back in 1930s. He sat on the U.S. Supreme Court in Washington, D.C., in the circuit in there. In Washington, D.C., in the U.S., there's a river that separates D.C. from Virginia. It's called the Potomac River. There are two bridges. One's a toll bridge, and the other one's a free bridge. So the judge, in a ruling, listed this out. And he said, look, if I use the toll bridge and don't pay, that's tax evasion, for which I should go to jail, because I used something that should have cost money, but I didn't pay it. Now, if I use my means available to me and drive a little bit out of my way and use the free bridge, that's tax avoidance, for which I should be commended. So yeah, the difference is if we are knowingly doing something to try to get out of a tax that we know is owed and just hoping, that's fraudulent. Like that, we can't do that. But man, as long as there's politicians in any government, these tax rules are going to have incentive and things built into them because they want to take care of their voting base. It's how politics works. And you just have to find those loopholes. Let the rich people pay the lobbyists, and then we take advantage of those rules. There's nothing wrong with avoiding taxes because you're using legal means to minimize what you pay. But if we're evading it by committing fraud, that's just, you should go to jail for that. Don't do that. We can't do that. Yeah.
Do you often find people by accident don't realize that some of the things they're doing is classed as evasion, through honest misunderstandings? If there's certain things that quite often crop up that people don't understand, that if they just did it in a different way, they'd be okay?
Earlier in my career, I would say I came across some people, it's like, oh, I got to pay tax on that. But nowadays, with the information that we have available, and my strong recommendation that you should always just talk to a professional, you're going to find out pretty quickly that what you are doing is tax evasion. Because most people will tell you, like, I don't think you can do that. But if it does happen, look, you fix it. You just do what you can. And that's your argument. Like, I didn't know.
Yeah, you pay your dues.
Yeah. And you actually, like with the IRS, for example, you just hope that they don't select that year that you might have done something a little not approved.
In error. Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes based on the amount, it makes complete sense to go back and amend tax returns to say, well, now that I discovered the issue, I'm going to go back and pay the tax that I didn't know I should have paid.
Yeah, because I guess the implications of them discovering something later on, they will naturally consider you to be a high risk. And one assumes then that could launch a very intensive investigation as to all your taxes over a much longer period of time, which I guess could be quite frightening.
Yeah, and it is. It's not pleasant when they come in and they give you a long list of 6 years of returns and all the receipts that they want to look at. But we have found open communication with the IRS when mistakes like that have been made is a lot better, because they ultimately want their tax. If you're not communicating with them, they know they're not getting their tax, so they have no issue putting you in jail. Now, they do make dumb decisions. I mean, I've had them threaten and try to close a client's business in order for him to pay a back tax that they would have taken a settlement amount less, instead of letting him stay in business and let him get on an installment plan. So we had to work through their idiocy there. But in most cases, they really, as long as you communicate with them, they'll work with you and not throw you in jail, which is helpful.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Now, what's becoming quite clear is that tax laws change on a regular basis, pretty much every year. And trying to keep up with that, unless you're a professional, is an absolute minefield, almost impossible, I guess. Are there any particular ways for the people that are on a low budget, how they can try and keep aware of how the taxes are changing, so they can try and keep themselves fairly well informed? Are there good resources, or are there communication methods that perhaps you do to help your clients keep abreast of developments as they occur?
Yeah. And low budget or not, using a professional or not, yeah. Anytime there's an election cycle, which is every year, laws are changed. Now, in most cases, the laws that are changed are tweaking existing things. For the US, for example, the last major change happened in 2018. There was a lot of stuff that happened with our tax code, but in general, there's small tweaks. But that being said, yeah, honestly, there's not one single resource that I could pinpoint, because there's lots out there, but you want to follow those who are putting out the free content to let you know that that's what they do. That's the content they're putting out, is we're keeping people in the know of changes that are made. Now, if you're using a professional, hopefully, like what we do is when those happen, we email our clients and let them know, here's a tax law change. They're automatically going to get the email from us letting them know. So hopefully your professional is doing that. If you're using a professional, if not, you can just find someone who deals with your country taxes, and that they have a history of updating people with law changes.
Yeah. Now, obviously, I'm dealing regularly with procurement professionals, supply chain professionals that spend an awful lot of money for businesses. Now, there may be opportunities where, or perhaps the things they should be aware of, where they can take some basic knowledge that can come from professionals like yourself and say, well, actually, if you're spending a lot of money in this area, there may be a tax break or something like that. Would you say it's wise for, say, procurement and supply chain people to have a basic understanding of tax, basic understanding of how the implications of spending large amounts of money, perhaps it's for equipment for R&D purposes, for example, and they can work with their finance people, perhaps if they're a single owner of a business, when they make an investment on some new plant or something like that, they can take advantage of some of these breaks. What are your thoughts on people who are spending the money having a good awareness of opportunities like that?
Yeah, I mean, the last advice is similar, right? Like, if you know someone who's putting out content, so in this case, they're probably going to need to find someone industry specific who puts out content so they can stay on top of it. I mean, even if they're doing it as an employee of a business, can you imagine the value that you add and how you can go then to that company and say, like, here's why you deserve or why you should pay me more money? Because I'm, staying on top of all the things that are related to my responsibilities. And for sure, in the US and UK, while it's treated a little bit differently, both governments incentivize businesses to do research and development. So being familiar with what does our industry do and how does that relate to the R&D stuff is really valuable. In fact, you might find some of these people who do the free content, you could just send them an email. They might have a quick response for you that helps you understand these expenses qualify, these don't. This is how you need to track it so that when you file it, you qualify. And then you can go to the owner of the company and say, look what I found. Look at this. Do you want to give me 10% of the savings?
That would be nice. Yeah. Certainly I've experienced over many years in this field, there are businesses who realize that there are some opportunities for people to take advantage of some tax breaks or something. And obviously the salesman in those cases will actively obviously broadcast this information. So if you spend this money on this area, do you realize there's an opportunity to save tax or whatever the case may be? And that's all about relationships, keeping that relationship with those suppliers that can help you to mitigate some tax burdens or take opportunities.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like a good supplier will actually, that's a marketing pitch for them, right?
Absolutely.
You're going to get money back by spending money with me. So if you have a good supplier, hopefully they're giving you that information up front.
Yeah, exactly. And I picked that up, particularly as you say, with R&D. It's an area certainly everybody wants people to become more efficient, more effective. They want the businesses to thrive, and quite often there are incentives to try and encourage businesses to actively upskill, certainly with people, upskill their people, perhaps training, providing those training opportunities. Sometimes there's incentives there. Is that something that's quite common in the US as well?
Yeah,
for sure. Okay. Now, we mentioned just now that you keep your clients up to speed with what's going on. Now, I'm sure people will be interested to know, is there information on your website? Do you put out on your social medias for people who follow you these great and exciting things that are coming up? Do you want to share with people where they could go and perhaps follow you and hear about these new developments?
Yeah. So we have our website, incitetax.com, and that's incitetax.com. We have a blog there where we post a lot of stuff. We also have a YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and search Incite Tax, we try to turn all these things into videos as well, and short videos, because I don't like doing long videos. And that we put as much content out as possible. I just have the belief that as we educate people, there's enough people in the world who don't want to do the actual work that I'm not threatened by them knowing what I know and sharing my information. So we do our best to share everything that we know.
Okay, so it's a great source of information for people to follow up on. Now, one of the things we've talked about is obviously professionals in your game. Obviously, you can open your Google and search for great tax people in your area, shall we say. Now, whether that's the most effective way of finding the right company for you, the right competence, knowledge, expertise in your industry, as you mentioned, there are some specific tax strategies and knowledge for certain industries. Now, how do people go about finding the right tax person that marries with their own business? What's the process? What things would you recommend people do? What questions should they ask? How do they go about finding the right fit?
Yeah. So good point. Google, probably not the best option because all you're getting is the people who are the best marketers. Now, that being said, one thing you could do is if you know someone else in an industry, a colleague or whatever, who do you use? Do you like that person? That's always good. The other thing is we've talked about how do people be in the know? How do they learn things? Well, you might find that there's a professional that you're consuming their content because they're educating you on things and they actually have that service. So if you like the way they deliver the content, you potentially are going to like working with them directly. I would go off of that more than I would just a flat, top accountants in my area. And even I'd probably take that route even over the ask my colleague, Because sometimes business owners, they don't actually know how good their accountant is.
Yeah. And that's a fear, isn't it? That you're hopeful that the guy, the lady, the guy that's working for you are really at the top of their game. And not necessarily the fees they charge, should we say, could be a fair representation of their abilities. So choosing the right, if we're thinking from a legal context, having the right lawyer that's representing you when you're going to court is critical. People always want the best of the best, what best they can afford. And trying to find that same person from an accounting perspective is quite onerous. You want to make sure you've got the right person by your side who's really looking out for your interests, your personal interests and your business interests. And it's, the question is, how do you go about really finding okay, you have the right personality fit, but having the confidence that you've got somebody with the right abilities and the right knowledge is quite difficult, particularly people who are not financially necessarily fully aware. And that's a very difficult thing to assess when you're perhaps, you're a green person in this area.
No, and I get it. Like it's I feel the same way when I'm looking at my attorneys. It's like, I don't know anything about law. And so I hope this guy understands the contract law. I hope he's reading the contract that I'm asking him to review and telling me the things I should be aware of. So on one hand, I kind of go into it with the initial blind faith that if I trust the person who referred me to the professional, or if I like the content, that they know their stuff. But then I always look at it as it's an interview process for both of us. So you are more than able and should ask them questions. And the questions you ask have to be the ones that are important to you. So what's important to you? Do you want the lowest price? Do you want the accountant to be the least expensive? Then that should be the questions you ask. Like, well, what's your pricing and how do you compare to whatever? If saving taxes is the most important, how do you work with me on finding strategies for my business? If it's timeliness of communication, then tell me how your process works when I give you the information. Am I going to wait for 2 months before you contact me? Are you giving me updates? Like how fast do you get the returns done? If I have questions for you, how quickly do you respond? Are there times of the year that you just completely disappear? Like whatever's important to you, you just need to straight up ask the accountant that and then make your decision based on their answers.
Yeah. The thing I would recommend to people is to plan and prepare. Now, you obviously get your suite of potential candidates, shall we say, your beauty parade of tax advisors out there. I would look for their credentials and verify those credentials are real. I'm sure in the US, there's various letters out to your name confirming your credentials. And I'm sure that's possible to look those up to make sure that they're still alive and kicking, shall we say. Then plan and prepare the questions, as you rightly just said, that's critical to you, and try and determine from the responses whether you feel that there's an alignment and you're confident that they are really representing your industry. They're very knowledge in your industry as well. And that's all about preparation so that they go into the discussion, should we say, knowledgeable and fully aware and armed with the right things, and hopefully find a personal connection as well, because you want to get on with these people. You want to get on with your tax person, don't you? That's for sure.
Yeah, you need to get along. Well said. You have to get along with them too. Yeah. You're just not going to be happy. I mean, and we have that like in our firm, because we're like 67-ish team members at this point. And sometimes we get a client who's like, I liked your stuff, but I'm not really getting along with Bob. It's just because it's a personality difference. And so we let Bob know, hey, the client reached out. We're going to let Susie now work with the client. It's like, okay. And then they love Susie and they stay with us for years. So personality is important, because it could be as simple as where two people say the exact same thing, but based on personality, the way it's delivered comes across completely different.
Absolutely. I think there's lots of things for people to consider in our discussion today. Is there anything that you would suggest now as the final part in minutes? What things would you like to express to the audience about how to go about dealing with the tax affairs in a very informed and educated way?
I think just the encouragement, it's not as scary as it feels. And I get it. It's unknown. Most people don't think about this a lot, or maybe they haven't taken a step to find someone to help them with this element. I understand our finances are a very intimate part of our lives. And so opening that up to another professional, just most professionals that I've met, almost all of them, like they're not judging you as human beings. Okay. Like you don't have to be embarrassed about whatever your financial situation is. It might give you fear. So have courage that they really do want to help you. And they are living in an area of the world and the taxes or accounting that you don't. And so like utilize that. And then I will say those who are in a situation where you're not happy, changing professionals is very easy. Other than the difficult emotional conversation, which a lot of days is done through email anyways. So you don't have to have a phone call to let them know, hey, I'm not using your services anymore. But if you kind of feel like you're not getting what you need out of the professional, then find a professional that you are going to get what you need out of it.
Yeah. Is it something that, just a question coming into my mind there, is it something that's readily available, finding out the retention rates of clients with tax professionals? Is it something you could ask and be given an honest answer?
Yeah, that's the only way you would know. It's not like a public database.
Okay, cool. Well, there's lots of things there. I want to thank you, John, for coming on today. I encourage everybody to follow up with the different social media channels we mentioned about Incite Tax. I think there's lots to learn probably there, probably scary stuff as well. And so I'd actively encourage people to obviously connect with you and follow up with you.
Thank you.
Take care, John. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
So there's another Real Life Buyer podcast. I do hope you enjoyed it and it's given you some ideas and inspiration for greater action and achievement. If you are a purchasing or a supply chain professional, business owner or director, come and join my Facebook group, the Purchasing and Supply Chain Community Hub, a safe place to engage with like-minded, friendly people. See you soon. Bye.